2 o'clock, so let's start, everyone, because we have a fairly tight schedule. A warm welcome to the breakout session on trust principles and repository certification landscape, and that warm welcome is given to you by my co-chairs, Meredith Goins and Devi Lin, as well as by myself, Mickey Lindlar. And a warm welcome in particular to newcomers to RDA. For me, and this is only my second on-site RDA, and I still feel very intimidated by a lot of things. So I feel you, and I'm happy to join any kind of support group that may exist on that subject matter. So I already said that we have a tight agenda. It actually breaks down like this. After the welcoming and this quick rundown, you will have an intro of the Trust Principles Working Group given by Meredith. And then we have a number of short presentations lined up by Devin Donaldson on TDR certification. Ingrid Diller will talk to us about core trust seal certification experiences. I will do a quick pitch about Nestor recertification experiences. Robert Downs will talk about successes and challenges in meeting data, and Hervé Lure will talk about the core trust seal update. And I sincerely apologize for the gender imbalance in speaking time that I noticed when I put the numbers in there. That is not intentionally, and we will try to do better next time around, I promise. We have the Q&A and use cases, and then next steps and close. The link down here is to the collaborative notes, in which you also have the rundown, and two more things about housekeeping and exercise. One is that we would like to ask you to keep all questions for all presenters until the Q&A session at the end, because we have such a tight schedule and we want to make sure we get adequately through all presentations. What you can, of course, always do in the meantime is to add your questions to the collaborative notes in the meantime. That will also allow us to chase presenters with any open questions that remain afterwards, so we can have a follow-up discussion based on that channel. And one exercise, right, that's more of a workshop atmosphere. You're required to think along with us a little bit. So we would like to ask you and invite you that during the presentations that you hear today, to think about use cases that you might have in your own institution or in your own network of how trust principles can be used as a vehicle towards the implementation of trustworthy repository operations or implementations, which is not always the same thing. And we'll come back to those use cases during the Q&A session. Thank you. And I will hand over to Devi and Meredith.
Thank you, Mickey, and also it's a great pleasure to work with Meredith and just still keep the session going. And I was tasked to introduce a little bit of this interest group. And the two things I want to mention, like in the title, is like one is a certification, the other is the digital repository. So the certification for this working group is pretty loaded work. It's implied the authority approval, but also demanding responsibilities, the risk management, and problem solving. And then digital repositories have a very important role to support the long-term data preservations, but also shaping our choices for decision-making and data sharing, policy implementation, and innovations. So that, I think that's kind of the essence of this group's activity. So because of that role, our interest group have always attracted the deep thought leaders and change makers. And you may know that there is two key contributions from this working group to the community. One is the Culture Seal standards is born in this interest group, and also the trust principles. So for the Culture Seal standard, it is a unified standard born from the harmonization of the data seal approval and also the world data system. So it's kind of one of the a couple call the core values for RDA, like you need a consensus and harmonizations. And for trust principles, is really born because it's not every repository needs a certification, right? I think there's especially the newcomers, and so the trust principles more as a general guidelines, as accelerators for the new repository to get up to speed and grow healthy and rapidly. So that's kind of signify the, the inclusiveness and also the openness, and all this to work and among the other activities from the group are ongoing. So like, for example, the culture seal still the guidelines need to be revised every 3 years, based on the evolving needs of users. And also there is challenges, like because of the growth, and is need some way to make the culture seal operation financially sustainable, and to support the volunteer-based operation. I think that's kind of the challenge we're probably going to also touch upon today. And for trust principles, is published 3 years ago. I heard like the FAIR principle is 10 years ago, so we kind of still need time to catch up. But I think the issue is that there is a wide acceptance of the concepts, but I think is need to translate into action. So that's kind of where the impact comes from. And so so these two topics also will be the main focus for today's discussion. So that's kind of a general discussion for this interest group. And I want to kind of give a little bit hideaway into the trust working group, which is kind of approved by the council, RDA council, a couple of months ago. And we have a little work done, but need a lot of help. And so I will tell you what do we need to work on. So the trust principles, as I said, is generated from the discussion just like today, and is widely adopted. There is like 44 organizations, publishers, the research, professional society kind of endorse the trust principles, and also that if you look at the paper publications, it's really kind of start growing, and I calculate like it's about like maybe kind of like 3 or 4 reads per day and 1 citation every week. So I think the people like are kind of using the concepts and in different publications, and then it's kind of in the top 2% of the kind of like attentions among the publication, like all metrics track. So I think in a sense we're happy with that. This is the community consensus is come back to the community, but I think I think the challenge is that how do you leverage that type of attention to have some work to do, like to make the data preservation working, that like for the build a robust data ecosystem. So the transfer people have not heard about it is the acronym is for transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology. And you can see the paper there, and just give a very brief introduction. I think for transparency is really about disclose what you can do and what you cannot do, and the responsibility is that you fulfill that promise. And user focus is that you listen to your users and whatever they need. If they need fair, give them fair. If they need open, they give them open. But if they say not open, they can, because of the privacy, clinical concerns, then keep it closed. And then sustainability is to make that service for the long term. And I think that's what the is complementary to kind of FAIR principles, which is more on the technical side, and then the trust principle is really on the operational side, like support the repositories. And then technology is that you have to have the sufficient the computational or security support for the operation. And so I'm trying to. This is the first time I just kind of randomly select, probably like there was about 200 papers that cite like trust principles, and we see like what they say in the peer review publications, and what we see the issues. And sorry, there is some format change. It's between Apple and Microsoft still. So I think that's kind of one of the concern is the FAIR principles and trust principles are the aspirational goals. There's no like detail, right? But I think people are mentioning them as standards. And that's sort of the concern because for trust is not a standard, is a way that you tell people like what is the guideline you're going to do. And actually there was a and kind of people got it right. Like so the trust, I think as Mickey mentioned a little bit too, like it is a communication tool that to unify the repository communities. It doesn't matter what how many standards are there, right? I think all of them are important. So we need to have this repository community to send one message that data preservation is important, right? It's more like the FAIR principles. I think one of the contribution is say data is important, right? It's not just for scientists, for everyone, like politicians, like founders, different advocacy groups. Everybody think the data is important, and then I think we want them to know like the repository is important as well. So that's what the main purpose for trust principles. And then I think there is mention now, I think like in the papers, like you can endorse trust principles, that's goodwill, which is good. But also you need the implementations. You need to put out the evidence that the people can verify that you have done your work. You want to make effort to be trustworthy, right? And then your users can trust it, your operation. So I think the concept is there. I think what we are seeing is that we want that to be more widespread, and that's kind of what this working group is about. And so I think I put it into like three categories. That the first category, like say, we leverage what the awareness of the trust right now, and then the people start to generate more publications and like reports, and there was some funding announcement, like the ones from NIH. Actually, by the way, I'm from NIH, but I'm not representing NIH. I kind of represent my personal opinion, but there is the funding opportunities that help repository to increase their trustworthiness. And I know there's a European Commission, European funding agencies also do the similar things, which is good thing to see. And I put there as a solid arrow so that we have done well there. And hopefully, the curve is still like climbing. But we have like two dotted lines, which I think we need work. One is that there was a lot of other concepts there other than certification, like in the US, there was OSTP, the Office of Technology and Science Policy Office. They publish the desirable characteristics of repositories. And at this meeting, we heard there is a repository properties, right? And there's also the FAIR principle, CARE principle, a lot of other things, and how trust kind of related to them, right? How we can work together. And that's the things is not there yet. I think we probably need some toolkits or some path to connect all these things together. And then the third one is the like certifications and rapid assessment from Data Preservation Coalition. Those categories is that I think it's a little bit more further. Like say you have these definitions, but you need somebody to verify it, right? So so how we connect that? Like gave people a tool that you trust but verify. So that I think that's kind of the work that we need to do, and I think that's probably my my last slide, and I think we'll give the floor to Meredith and give you a little bit update on the what is working group have done so far. And then we definitely need more help. And so please join us.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I've talked with many of you via email, Zoom meetings, or here locally, so I appreciate your support in working towards getting these principles out there, showing how they're used, and engaging the community. So why does trust matter? And I don't really feel like I need to give this answer to you because you're in this room, because I believe you know this already. But I'm going to give you just this diagram, and many of you may have seen this before, but to me, it's the best representation of how to move forward. So we look at data from both the datum, the collection of data, and also how we get it out to our community, right? So think about how we build both fair and trust and care principles past just that catchphrase. Oh yeah, I'm trustworthy. Well, how? Show me. How do you have that conversation? Is that a statement? Is that somebody replicating your data? What is that? And that's some of the things that we're trying to help you figure out how to move forward as this group is works going forward. And then, so really, if you look at the top, the data sharing policies and directives, all that data must come through to the data repository. So I'm with the World Data System. If you know a data repository that needs some support, give me a call. And then how do we move it down? So that's where you come in with the different layers of certifications, potentially, the working groups coming together to build a better process, down to those data objects, so that fair data principles, making it findable, right? So those very specific pieces, all the way down to the community, that networking, that overarching, but that comes down to those, to the principles there. So that's really long-term, and we care about long-term. Many of you may have heard some of the sessions yesterday. We don't want this for this year, next year, maybe 25 years from now. When you're thinking of data in crisis, you're going to need data for the long-term. We do hard work. We want this to be findable for a long time. So think through that. It is a continuum, and how do we contribute to that continuum? So why trust? So here's what the trust working group's really working towards. This is an implementation. Consider this as, a call to action, how you can engage and help us move this forward. What are we trying to do? We want to know, what's the challenge in showing that trust is working, that your data is trustworthy? How do we do an uptake of utilizing the trust principles? Are there specific implementation commonalities across all of the different ways? That's another aspect to consider. This isn't for us to tell you, it's the working group to then inform the community, right? This is not just a top down, it's a discussion. Also, we want to understand how we can improve the use of the trust principles. And then we need to clarify, and that way you had mentioned this, trust to care, trust to fair, and then trust to the certification frameworks. Part of that mapping, if you will, needs to happen. We need to show how everything is interrelated. We need to have support from both the community, but through your actions in your day-to-day work as well. Many of us care very deeply about all of the principles. Some of us may lean towards one or the other because it might resonate strongly with us. That's where it comes together, where we all come together and make those decisions. But it's not, you don't need certification to do this. Is it helpful? You got it. It sure is. But you want to be able to tell people when you're introducing your paper, maybe next RDA, when you're sharing your most recent research or update, how you're meeting these different pieces. That's part of it. That's part of it. So what are our deliverables? And these are out there on the website for everybody to talk through. We are, I am graciously awaiting my IRB to approve our survey. So yay, IRB, right? So we have created a survey, running it through IRB to be able to release it. and then be able to report out on the findings. When that comes out, we'll send out emails. Please go into the collaboration notes, put your email in there. We'd love for you to take the survey. We'd love for you to give us feedback on that. And then share it broadly. Send an email to your colleagues who may be interested in giving feedback on that. We're also looking at collecting and analyzing reports on case studies or use cases, a less scary term in my mind. So if you remember, Mickey had tasked us to think about use cases. We're going to talk about that later. That could then help us drive towards that to be able to collect. Ideally, we'll have one from every different type of certification, and then from those repositories that aren't certified. Those of you in research that aren't a part of a repository that are trying to figure out how do you look at a repository and decide if this is where you should place your data, is this something you're thinking of? So let's talk about those use cases. So get your minds working. It's time to have that conversation at the end. Then we want to really map out the how it works to all the different certifications. I'm very grateful Dawe as part of the Core Trust Seal Board is on the board. You'll hear from Ingrid, who's a part of Core Trust Seal right now as well, representing World Data System and over roughly 130 data repositories, being able to send it out to those individuals and show how it interacts. And Mickey with Nestor, my apologies. And we'd love to see ISO an example from ISO. What certifications are out there that want to be able today, but also tomorrow? So think about that as well. We want to create and test some guidelines. This is another way that you can offer some feedback and also some guidance going forward. We want to know how to implement trust and show that we're doing it. One, your funder's going to love it. Two, they're going to want to see that you're making a path forward. And by having a self-assessment tool, and this is often as simple as a checklist, to be able, what are you thinking of to walk through the process? What are you thinking of so that you can then, when, to show when you're speaking about your research, your data repository, your data, what are you thinking of to show that it meets the trust principles? And then also we want to create, launch, and update a wiki on trust. This is so that we have an ongoing communication, documentation, and input from the community. It can't just be the working group. It has to be everybody working towards implementing these principles. It is rare that you don't know about FAIR when you introduce it to somebody. People are like, yes, I know the FAIR principles, right? Try that with trust sometime. And if they don't know what the trust principles are, send them a link, inform them of what it is, because that, especially for me, the transparency and the user perspective is what's drew me into this working group so closely. So those are what we hope to accomplish. We're still on step one. And I want to thank, and if you aren't aware of it, and you should be after being here, we were able to receive some support from the RDA Tiger Group. We'll be working with them starting after this conference to start having some support from them to be able to move us forward a little bit faster through these different deliverables. So we want to make sure that we give them thanks for selecting our working group, but also to give you another way to interact with others. So how else can you get involved? I asked you for feedback on all of those things. When those deliverables start rolling out, now you know what's going to happen over the next 18 months-ish. I love that ish, right? You gotta sign up. We've had 2 signups just this week, and I haven't even asked people to sign up yet. So I'd love to see another 2 signups from this room or from your colleagues. Join us today. So yay, you've already done something. Hands, congratulations to you. We have a standing meeting. We did cancel it last month because we were trying to prepare for here. And my apologies. That was more me begging, saying, please, I'm kind of swamped with IDW right now. And thank you all for being here at IDW. It's so important that we have this community conversation. Join us. And then email us to learn more. If there's a way that you want to fit in, if you have a potential use case, if you just want to talk somebody through a use case, call me, email me. We'll set a Zoom meeting. I can help you write it on the fly. There we go. And then we can finalize it through email if you wish. It doesn't have to be so laborious that it stops you. It could be as simple as a conversation. So let's have that conversation. That's how we collect and show and move forward. And that's what I have really for us right now. I want to thank Dawei and all of Ingrid and all of the original co-authors. That is a long list of people. And we don't do fair justice. Please go out, look at that. I bet you know somebody that helped create the initial principles. Go out, look at it, see who you can have a conversation with. And you should be doing this anyway at IDW, but I think that this is the biggest part to help it drive and move things forward. We've got passion from the leadership. We need passion from the field as well. And I see some in the room, so I'd be grateful to at any time have the conversation with you. So thank you again. And next we're going to have Devin join us for a brief moment to share some of his research with us. So thank you.
Hi, so I'm Devin Ray Donaldson, and if you have your phones, you can utilize the QR code, or if you're on your laptops, you can utilize the bit.ly, because the research that I'm going to be talking about was published a little bit earlier this year. Okay. Like I said, I'm Devin Ray Donaldson. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Information and Library Science in the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering. So that's who I am. And my research interests span archives, digital preservation, digital repositories, data sharing practices, data quality, mass digitization, research data management, trust, and security. So that can tell you right there, one of the reasons, some of the reasons why I'm here today. In 1996, Don Waters and John Garrett first argued for audit and certification of trustworthy digital repositories to produce a network of repositories and identify institutions that could actually be trusted with the responsibility of preserving important digital information for the long term. Since the Waters and Garrett report was published, multiple standards for TDRs have been developed worldwide, including but not limited to trustworthy repositories, audit and certification, criteria and checklist or TRAC, and its subsequent audit and certification of trustworthy digital repositories, the ISO standard ISO 16363. TDR standards from Germany, including the catalog of criteria for trusted digital repositories, Nestor and the Nestor seal, and their subsequent, the international standard criteria for trustworthy digital archives, are DIN 31644. Beyond the German TDR standards, other TDR standards include the requirements for the International Council for Science, World Data System regular members, the Data Seal of Approval, or DSA, and the Core Trust Seal. So there's been this development for quite some time. Now that some of these TDR standards are well over 10 years old, we can begin to ask questions aimed at understanding the impact of certification on repositories. How trustworthy are these repositories? Do they become more trustworthy as a result of certification or as a result of recertification over time? This question is important because some certifications only last for a specific time period, so recertification is necessary to retain that designation and remain compliant over time. So does becoming certified make repositories better, specifically since repositories have been becoming certified or recertified over the past decade? So we can ask questions like, does recertifying make repositories better? In other words, does becoming recertified as a TDR over time lead to improvement in repositories' infrastructure, processes, and services? Somewhere along the way, I became kind of obsessed with questions like these. I first learned about TDRs when I was a graduate student at UNC, being advised by Dr. Helen Thibault, who was very interested in TRAC at that time, when I was that dates when I was in an MLS student. But ever since then, I've been really interested in this, and I've been kind of watching the growth and development of these standards with a relatively close eye. To answer these research questions, me and one of my graduate students at Indiana University analyzed a sample of TDR audit reports from the Data Seal of Approval and Core Trust Seal programs. We did that because it represented the most widely adopted certification programs worldwide at the time when we did the study, and they made their audit reports publicly available in English, which was very important for me in terms of analysis or being able to analyze. And we had to operationalize trustworthiness. So for the purpose of this study, trustworthiness was defined as the composite numerical score derived from a repository's recorded level of compliance with each of the 16 requirements in the Data Seal of Approval. I know they've been updated since this time, but we finished data collection around, in accordance with this version and ones before. So for the 2020 to 2022 CTS had 16 requirements pertaining to each of these right here in the middle column. For each requirement, a repository gets a score ranging from 0, not applicable, to 4. The guideline has been fully implemented in the repository. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Analysis of descriptive statistics for the TDR's compliance level score shows that repositories that recertify commonly report both increases and, to a lesser extent, decreases in their compliance, with the mode amount being a change of positive 2.5. Performing a least squares linear regression on the scores of repositories that recertify shows a slope of 0.8, bearing a slightly positive trend. So they typically either become more trustworthy or remain just as trustworthy as they were the last time they got recertified. So we looked at deltas, changes between certifications, rather than score changes because of, for example, zeros aren't bad, so it's not applicable. We observed a ceiling effect where most of the TDR's cumulative compliance scores cluster near 64, the top of the graph, and the maximum cumulative compliance level for these TDRs. So these repositories are highly trustworthy. Additionally, analysis of the data along the x-axis demonstrates that most of the repository scores change minimally. That is no more than a gain or loss of 5 points between certifications. So they are very highly trustworthy and remain that way as they recertify over time. Now, to answer the second research question, we conducted topic modeling. So these topics are the result of NLP on the information that was provided in the audit reports. The 16 guidelines didn't inform the development of our topics. The topics were derived independently of the 16 guidelines, of changed text between certifications for repositories that got recertified over a 10-year period. So what changed from one audit report to the next for the same repository that got recertified either once or twice over the 10-year period in terms of the text that was added and in terms of that text that was deleted? And we found that most of the changes to audit reports when repositories recertified corresponded to 5 of our topics. So governance, organizational networks and expertise, fitness for use of data by researcher communities, security and recovery planning, licensing and ethics, and discovery and reuse of data by end users. The topics less likely to be subject of textual changes were associated with our remaining 3 topics: versioning, integrity, description, and metadata harvesting, requirements, standards, and best practices for metadata, file formats, deposit and submission, and infrastructure workflows and interfaces for data lifecycle management. For repositories whose cumulative compliance scores change the most between certifications, so scores improved by 10 or more points, we identified improvements to their storage, quality control processes, codes of conduct, workflows, cyber infrastructure, and their adoption of other relevant repository standards. For example, one repository reported no evidence of compliance in multiple areas the first time they certified, and in contrast, reported full compliance for those guidelines when they recertified. So in sum, our analysis of 10 years of repositories' DSA and CTS audit reports suggests that these TDRs are discussing exactly the types of topics that are vital for data management and sharing. Our findings demonstrate that these repositories expanded their purview in response to digital preservation challenges beyond bit-level fixity with strategies for long-term organizational sustainability to focus on maximizing their holdings accessibility and usefulness for researchers. Moreover, our results show that many of these TDRs have either maintained a standard of excellence or have improved in their stewardship capabilities as a result of recertification. Topic frequency in changed text was more distinct among words added than words removed, suggesting that improvement is expressed by developing new services and strategies for continued access and preservation, while less drastic revisions are evidence of maintenance of existing capacity. I know I'm running out of time. So when I first finished this research, I thought where we needed to go next is creating an ontology for improvements to repositories infrastructure, processes, and services. I thought having such an ontology would be useful for more consistently identifying improvements to repositories, which in turn could be useful for measuring the impact of certification on repositories. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe we don't need an ontology, since I learned at the last plenary that I attended that you all hosted for this session, that auditors do a lot of work with repositories on the front end before final submission to ensure compliance and success, which I think I already knew, but the point was, brought home and reinforced to, I think, John Crabtree in particular. So now I'm thinking about analyzing the more recent CTS audit reports for evidence of transparency. And I was inspired by the International Digital Curation Conference theme of trust through transparency and the trust principles that explicitly link transparency to trust. The first T is transparency. So what happens when there are limits about how transparent repositories can be about the services they provide and the data they have? That might be where I go next. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that conversation. And I'm going to go straight through. We have Ingrid next. If you'd please join us to share her experience on Fairs Fair. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Meredith. And I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to hurry up. Ingrid Diller from DANS in the Netherlands, and I'm going to give you an example of a support program that helps repositories go through certification. It is an example in the context of European projects. There are many examples around of, let's say, kind of self-support groups of repositories. For example, on national scales, we see that in Canada, we have one in Australia going, in the Netherlands. We also see some European research infrastructures providing such a context for repositories to certify. So there are different contexts. The example I will give you today is the example of the Fairs Fair project, which was a project that was coordinated by DANS that ran from 2019 for 3 years till 2020, funded by the European Commission. And the mission of that project was, let's say, to implement the FAIR principles in policies and practices, data and services within the European Open Science Cloud. So really about practical solutions to implement FAIR. And a big chunk of work in that project was focused around certification. As you can see on the screen, under the certification theme, we had a couple of activity strands. And one of those activity strands focused on support and guidance for certification of data repositories. So in that program, we had different pillars. The first pillar, the first approach was to work with relatively advanced repositories to help them implement technical solutions to improve the interoperability of the data that they hold. So we provided in-kind support to 12 repositories in this area. We also provided lots of webinars that were openly available for everyone. But the thing I want to focus on is the third strand of activities, which was focused on helping repositories to get ready for certification according to Core Trust Seal. That program, so there was an open call for that. And in the end, we selected 10 repositories to go through that program. And as you can see here on the slide, that program consisted of different elements. So we provided support workshops. We helped the repositories with drafting the self-assessments. There was also a lot of peer review through the whole process of each other's self-assessments to learn, go through that learning path together. There were also one-on-one feedback rounds because, of course, you're dealing with, to a certain extent, sensitive information. So there also needs to be a level of trust in the group that the things that you share, the problems that you run into, maybe the requirements that you're not easily, are not easily able to meet, can be shared together. There was also funding involved, 10,000 euro to go and get the certification and also pay Core Trust Seal. Part of the funding was for that, but also to invest the human resource. So it consisted of workshops, self-assessment, one-on-one support and peer support. And I need to hurry up. So we had 10 repositories, 9 of them to their, for some to their own surprise, managed through this support program to get during the time of the project their Core Trust Seal. The 10th one got it as well a little bit later. We engaged these repositories, by the way, also in different elements of that project. So there was really a strong tie between the projects and the repositories involved. So all in all, it was a positive experience. Learned a lot through peer exchange. I want to stress that. That was very important. We have the lessons learned captured in different documents, and you can find the links in the slides. One important recommendation that came out, please give us support programs like that, but not only focused on Core Trust Seal certification. And we have listened to that call. We have a follow-up program running in Europe called Fair Impact, where there is in-kind resource and funding available to support repositories. There is an in-kind open call at the moment, open until the 1st of November, where repositories can go to. Also repositories that are not based in Europe, by the way. You get support in different areas, as you can see here on the screen, through the project. So anybody who is interested, go and have a look at the website. And for the final 10 seconds, I would like to do a shout out for a new working group that we are setting up also with support from RDA Tiger, that was mentioned already by Meredith. A working group that intends to look at what could be the requirements for trustworthy technical repository service providers, because we see that repositories more and more depend on outsourcing partners with respect to certain activities and services that they provide to their user group. And with that, I leave you, and I hope I'm in time.
Was an impressive quick run through. I don't know how to follow that. All right, so I will talk about the kit that's often forgotten, Nestor Seal certification. People tend to think it's dead or not around, but it is around and people use it. We are one of the examples of that. I think if you talk about certification, you always need to talk about the target of certification or the framework in which it takes place. So for us, that's TRB, my institution whom I'm talking for today. We are a library as well as a research institute, and we have a central infrastructure. So the big thing in gray there, which is hosted and maintained by us. So that's the storage, the servers, everything underneath that dictates how we can technically handle that data. And within that, or based on top of that technical infrastructure, we've implemented workflows, policies, and everything around for 3 different things. One is TIB preservation. So that's the preservation of everything that we have within our digital archive. We archive publication data as well as research data. We have external archives like the German DIL Wiley archive, which is currently 5 million articles and 52 million files, including research data for article data. We also have 3D data, AV data. We have a total of 236 file formats. So for everyone who thinks that library and archives just have 2 file formats, you're wrong. Then we also offer a full end-to-end offering called Preservation as a Service. That is for those institutions who are not able or willing or capable to do digital preservation by themselves. So it's a full service thing where we liaison or talk to our service customers about what kind of data they want to preserve. We help them pick out file formats, metadata, quality checks, and everything. And our customers, again, are research institutes like the Leibniz Institute for Regional Geography, as well as libraries like the State and University Library of Kiel. Currently have 7 customers, but are looking to extend that buy another 30 through a national or a state license for the state of Lower Saxony in Germany. And the last thing that we'd run on top of that infrastructure is a hosted system by TIB. So those are two institutions who work themselves within specific areas of said infrastructure, and they can make their own decisions. And why is that important when we talk about certification? Because when we talk about certification, we need to be very clear about what we can certify. We cannot certify the thing in gray itself, because if we think about trustworthy digital preservation certification, it goes back to the OAS principles. If we look at what OAS compliance means, it's something that is determined by what an institution has implemented as a policy, and that cannot be decided by a software vendor, by a service provider, or by machines. So what we are certifying here is the central infrastructure based for, or as put in place for TIB preservation. We're pretty certification happy, so to speak. We use it as slight force put upon ourselves to make sure that our documentation is up to date, alternating between a German-speaking and an English-speaking certification framework, because we make our documentation available in both languages. So we started in 2015, and we were the first institution to recertify against the Nestor seal in 2022, and are currently working on our Core Trust Seal recertification, which we hope to hand in soon. So our goal is to recertify every 1.5 years. We're a little bit behind schedule with Core Trust Seal, but we're trying our hardest. So two constant struggles I want to mention. One is that of the concept of a dark archive, right? So there's a lot of misconceptions about dark archives as we try to explain that to people. People think that it's a magic black box that you toss data into and no one can ever access it, which I don't even know why people have that idea. But it's not. It just means you have to have some trigger events defined that describe conditions under which data is made available, which is true for a lot of archives in the first place, right? But problems that pertain to dark archive definitions and certification is that it's typically not, there's no placeholder in any kind of certification document where you have the means to describe in comparable detail of what your dark archive implementation does or means. Core Trust Seal did a really good job, I think, in the R0 criteria to allow for more background information that helps reviewers contextualize your certification document. But there's still room for growth, I think, which we see based on the fact that in every time we go through a recertification, we get questions about that. It's still not clear. There's no placeholder where we can contextualize how, for example, how we make our authenticity trail or integrity trail available to the end user. We describe how that is contained with the metadata and how we pass the entire metadata container to the person whom we're giving data to in the trigger event, but there's still questions. And I think we could just clarify that a bit better in certification documents. And the second example is a very digital preservation nerdy topic, that of significant properties. For those who are not aware of what significant properties are, they're essentially, to read Andrew Wilson's definition, the characteristics of digital objects that must be preserved over time in order to ensure the continued accessibility, usability, and meaning of the objects and their capacity to be accepted as evidence of what they purport to record. So essentially, the question that you have to ask yourself is, if I migrate my object and I lose some information about that, what is acceptable and what isn't? Is color vital information or is color not vital information? There's been a lot of work done around significant properties. It's a tough topic to grasp, I think. And that is also then again carried in certification frameworks. Core Trust Seal does not mention significant properties. Nestor Seal does, and I think ISO 16363 does as well. So how we approach the topic is that we try to differentiate between technical significant properties, which are things or it's metadata that we can extract from a digital object. So it's something we can automatically capture. And we try to map that to the expectation that the user has in the digital object. So to give an example, there. So the expectation of the user would be that they want to have a full representation of image representation. There's an image in my archive and they want it to look the exact same way, regardless of what the file format is. So we can define that by things that we can extract. We can extract length and width information, resolution and bit depth, color space and compression. And all of those criteria influence how the picture will be rendered. Right? So that is essentially a technical measure to explain quality factors. And that's something we can extract and map. So that's how we define significant properties. Not all criteria that are deemed as significant properties can be monitored through technical means. For example, if one of your criteria is that the community has the means to render the object, so that means that they must have software available to render the file format, they must know how to use it, and that's something that's highly dependent on your community, and it's not a global standard. There's some subject fields that might consider a file format highly relevant that most of the rest of the world has not heard about, and that, by the way, is why designated communities are an important thing. But there's no technical thing to map that to, right? So that's a problem. And the recent Nestor C response that we got this year, and we had a lot of discussions with them, is that it is currently not possible to meaningfully define and implement significant properties yet. I think there's some truth to that, but there's a lot of work that is being done by the community. And I think this kind of speaks for a general problem that certification frameworks have, that they need to do a better job to interlink with best practice, good practice, state of the art, and look at what other institutions are doing. And then to also use that in their reviewer guidelines to take things of practical digital preservation and practical repository processes into consideration. And because I have no more time, if you're curious to learn more, if you're curious to learn why we're even going through certification, we wrote a paper a few years ago where we defined return on investment benefits, intrinsic and extrinsic ones. And I mentioned that our entire documentation is online. Here's the link. Thank you.
Thank you. So don't forget, you can put comments in the working documents, get prepared to ask questions. But last up for right now for the presentations will be Bob Downs. Please join us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Meredith, and I'll try to be quick with my 5 minutes too. So, yeah, my sponsors are NASA, CDAC, ESCO, and Astromat. So CDAC is the Socioeconomic Data and Application Center. ESCO is the ESDIS Standards Coordination Office, and Astromat is the Astromaterials Data System. And so these guys. I wanted to give you a little graphical depiction of the evolution. I know Devin gave us a great description of some of these historical artifacts that were developed over time. And this is just another way of looking at it. And this isn't an entirety. There are many other artifacts out there, certification instruments, guidance, what have you, that have come and gone along the way. We didn't get here without standing on the shoulders of many. And so, and you know, this is just part of the story. It's still going on. And so, and I don't mean to leave any of the current data repository certification instruments out of the picture, but thought it might be helpful just to look, you know, a couple of those that are still with us: Core Trust Seal and ISO 16363. For those who aren't familiar with ISO 16363, that was developed based on the Open Archival Information System reference model. That's OIIS to some. And just as Core Trust Seal to some extent is also based on the OIIS reference model. But I should mention that both the ISO 16363 and the OAIS reference model, which is ISO 14721, are currently under revision, and they could be released any day. It's kind of a complicated process with the ISO getting through that whole process. And with both of these, they come through the Consultative Committee for Space Data Systems. There's an extra layer of agreements and negotiations that have to take place in order to get through that process. But the benefit is when you're going through the Consultative Committee for Space Data Systems, these things become freely available. So you can get these for free, or you can pay ISO for them. But the difference is ISO puts a cover sheet on them. So for what it's worth. So quickly, I will go through some challenges here, and there are others. I just chose these because they are been on my mind recently. The consistency, and this isn't just for Core Trust CL. This applies to all. So this is not meant to be a criticism of Core Trust CL. It's all of them. And that's humans are doing these reviewers, and certainly it's better than trying to get some machines to do it. We'll be answering to the machines next. And the training and communication is certainly needed in this regard, but I think that more will probably be needed as well to get consistency among data repository assessment reviewers. And then let's think about those data repositories either in the developing countries or those who are trying to do things new and differently. This is very expensive to try to do something new. You know, you got to convince others, and that's always tough. New? Why should we go new? Right? The old's always worked. And then enabling understanding by the designated community. And I just want to point out, you know, the generalist repositories where we can submit anything in what, 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. We should have a race, see how fast we can do it. 30 seconds. And how much review is going in to those versus the others. And then data quality. And that also goes for the generalist versus the domain repositories. That's, you know, I won't say more on that. So I just wanted to think a little bit about this spectrum here. And there's certainly more rigorous requirements out there than ISO 16363. We can look at some other ISO requirements that corporations have to undergo, for example. And at that extreme, and then, you know, there are self-assessment instruments at the other end, or even, you know, less formal ways of doing it there. But we, in the middle, in between, and there are others out there, Nestor, et cetera, that give us options here. But I'm wondering if we do have kind of a monopoly going on to some extent, and whether all of the needs are being serviced by what's out there now. So these are just some thoughts, things to think about. And think about the evolving data repository ecosystem in that sense. Thank you very much.
I'm getting my steps in on these stairs, I tell you. I want to welcome a Core Trust Seal update from him. Please join us, and he has 10 minutes. I'll give you a warning at 2 to get an update. So thank you very much and welcome.
Everyone, Hervé Lours. We'll do a quick update and see if we can reassign the gender balance during the question phase, shall I? And I will, oh, it's not a touch screen. We'll whiz back through these because everyone's seen a lot of this anyway. So the Core Trust CL does both the requirements and the certification process. It's RDA endorsed from a working group that you'll have heard about earlier under this interest group, with a goal to provide a single core sustainable TDR certification. It's been around since 2017. It's a not-for-profit foundation. It offers 3-year certification and a periodic review of the requirements. And it's divided into organizational infrastructure, technology, digital object management, and rather essentially active preservation within the curation at the heart of what's going on there. 16 requirements with a self-assessment submitted to peer reviewers and a board review, followed by either revision or assignment of the Core Trust Seal. I'm going to give you a quick overview, an update on the next step. Our chair, Core Trust, John Crabtree, couldn't be here today, so I'm talking on his behalf. So the administrative fee increase, ouch. Fee increase to €3,000 for a 3-year certification. This is the first increase since the inception in 2017. We've just undertaken a load of projections on sustainability, looked at the growth, and looked at the service delivery as well. The Core Trust Seal resources and growth chart is pretty high, as you can see. Over that time, we've not only seen an increase in applications, but also an increase in the overall challenges of delivering a response. Now, growth is not guaranteed. The projections are not based on that. The projections are based on current costs, the additional administrative resources required, and a goal of 10-year sustainability, Core Trust Seal for Core Trust Seal, if you like, trying to hold ourselves to our own requirements. So this fee increase includes, assuming no growth, a small loss over that period, which is sustained through the reserves of the organization. But alongside this increase in applications, we've seen a broader applicant base. And this is one of the big challenges where I think I used the phrase earlier, canary in the coal mine for certification and engagement. We're seeing a broader applicant base from a lot of less experienced repositories. Yeah, people who haven't been through this before. We're seeing a greater number of issues per application, more iterations per application, and that's got an increased administrative impact. And that obviously increased costs and time. But that fee covers administration. Yeah, your peer reviewers are volunteers still. So one of the cost increases is there to develop a role to address triage, scope, and consistency across reviews, as you've just heard from Bob. The idea here is to reduce the impact on those volunteer peer reviewers, to identify the out-of-scope applications very early in the process, that can take too long at the moment, and to overall increase the speed and the consistency of the reviews. Now, we'll see growth in this, but across these other different certifications, we'll also have to look at how the secretarial and the administrative support in those grows sustainably over time. The critical factor, as Ingrid has said, is to make sure that umbrella organizations and other groups offer that pre-certification support, which we know rapidly improves the process and the quality of the applications as well. Board membership and elections update here. The board is drawn from the Assembly of Reviewers. Yeah, we are looking for interim board members. Obviously, people leave over time. If you're interested, info@coretrustseal.org. Anyone on the Assembly of Reviewers is a potential candidate, and they will also be eligible to be renewed during the future elections in 2024. At least one reviewer per certified repository really is the best route to sustainability here of this whole process. The other update I've got here is on the maintenance group. Maintenance groups weren't an option within RDA when the Core Trust Seal was originally established. You can see the link there. You can find it on the RDA site. Do please join. In terms of having the feedback necessary for this, we need people to engage with the maintenance group. We need people to engage with that process. That is the route to consistency over time, because we need clarification and community consensus on what is expected. And the other big challenge for that group is to continue to define what is core, that pressure between increasing rigorousness and being open and accessible to a wider group of repositories over time. Now, unfortunately, we established the working group, and there was no session available at this RDA for that working group. So do please join. You'll hear about it afterwards. It'll be an opportunity to contribute to those future revisions, to champion Core Trust Seal itself alongside the other contexts that you've heard about here today, and to support inclusion and improvement over time. I think the essential thing here as well is to say that you can go away and use this stuff free of charge as a self-assessment process. If you want to see growth, if you want to see alignment with the trust principles, it's all out there for you. All of that information is public without going through a certification process. And I'm going to do one final slide, 6 minutes. So far, let's see if I can do 4 on this final slide, yeah? Just ruin it for everyone. So, related progress, efforts and priorities, he says, speaking at a reasonable pace. So there will be a gathering for the Assembly of Reviewers in December 2023. Join up if you're on that reviewer mailing list, you will hear about this. This will be a reviewer conversation so that we can also go back to redevelop more materials for the applicants as well. So there will be further news on that in December. You've heard from Ingrid on the technical repository service providers. It's going to be a critical input to how people outsource Core Trust Seal to others, but also a critical group to get consistency on the expectations of what both repositories and their own service providers should be providing. In the last round of requirements, we worked really hard to try and clarify the curation and preservation levels to define who was in scope and out of scope. We did not get a consensus on that point, so the Core Trust Seal members have prepared the curation and preservation levels. It is very much open for discussion to say who should and who shouldn't be in scope. And then the rather large European Open Science Clouds Task Force on Preservation, search for EOSC LTDDPTF in Zenodo, and you'll miraculously find it. But there's a big consultation document in there which takes both the Core Trust Seal and the Trustworthy Data Repository scope, but also the wider curation scope into context as well. It would be great to hear everyone's feedback on all of those. And that is all you'll be very grateful to hear from me.
Right on. Okay. So now it's time for your questions. What we're going to do is we're going to take questions both online and in person. So right now, and then we'll jump into some use cases. So remember, we had asked you to think about some potential use cases for the trust principles. We have no online questions yet. So do we have any in the room? Yes, please.
Hello, I have a comment and 2 questions. From the point of view of the researcher, shall we consider to talk with the scientific paper editors so that, for example, works coming out of certified repositories would have a smoother process for publication, for example? It sounds a bit like making a pact with the devil, maybe something considered.
What do you say? It's a fascinating, interesting question. So if I understand it correctly, do we want to engage the publishers in looking at the certified repositories? I would say we want everybody to look at it, and the publishers are part of the scholarly publishing, scholarly communication cycle and the information cycle. I would say yes. Dawe, Mickey, others, any feedback on that besides me?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think maybe I had one comment. I think the publisher did discuss about their repository support, and then they like Nature scientific data. They want probably transition maybe in the future to certify the repository as the repository they will recommend the authors will submit to. And then I think obviously like that need time because the certified repository is still a small number.
Yeah.
But I think there's an intention that they'll go through that process.
As Dawe makes his way over to the feedback over here, I'll say that I was at the Scholarly Society of Scholarly Publishing meeting this year and asked the publishers that, and they said, tell us what you want. So we need to speak up and tell them what we want. Please go ahead.
So thanks. I'm sorry to be contentious, but it seems that's always the case. Well, if I don't speak up, no one will, right?
Right.
So we're already seeing an issue, well, several issues with the publishers. One is some publishers, they're recommending certain repositories and not others.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is creating an unlevel playing field to begin with. And then say, play the devil's advocate here, we went along with that. would they be getting the updates and then following up, using those updated lists, or if they're not using those updated lists in a timely manner, then some certified repositories would be left out because they were newer.
Yeah.
You know, so I think we're really asking for trouble in this regard. There are lots of efforts going on to work with the publishers, but that is for the repositories and publishers to work together. And I'm appreciative of those efforts because they are making headway. We see some benefits potentially, but I think we have to be careful to start saying the publishers are going to define who's in and who's out. You know, and we already have issues where, because of the tradition, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years of tradition of the researchers, that is people in the scholarly community who are trying to become legitimate within their careers. They have to go through the publishers. This has been the case for centuries. And so the publishers, in a way, are the gatekeepers for people's careers.
Yeah.
Well, how much more can I say?
Yeah.
I think we could have a whole meeting about that. But yeah, I'll give the floor.
Thank you, Bob. And I'm going to let Mickey go next and get ready for other questions. My only follow-up I would say to that is I would want to know what criteria they're deciding what is available and what should be considered. Go ahead, Mickey.
Okay, so if we're talking about digital preservation, that issue is solved if you talk to the publishers. And I would partially agree, if you're talking about scholarly publications, I would recommend looking at ISSN Keepers Registry. You can enter an ISSN and see which keeper institution, including the big e-journal archiving institutions like Clocks, Portico, but also national libraries, actually already archive those journals. So that part is solved. If you're thinking about more of like an outward facing user experience right now, personal experience would say that it's not that much fun to discuss that issue with publishers. The other thing you might want to look at is the attached research data supplements. And again, speaking from experience, large publishers are going to say that that is up to the editor.
Yeah.
So they kind of just pass the problem back and forth, and it will never get solved. They also raise issues that they need possibilities to link sensitive data as research data, and they have no way to actually check on the repository side, and they cannot turn that paper down. So that will be very tough to solve. But preservation of the articles itself is actually more or less solved.
Thank you, Mickey. Any other feedback? I see no questions online. Do we have other questions in the room? Josh, yes. Hello, good to see you.
Hi, I'm Josh Young at Phoenix Bioinformatics, and something that came to mind both, I think Bob had this spectrum with like a couple of different placements and some missing, and then in the last talk, there was the point about a more diverse range of applicants to Core Trust Seal. And to me, as someone coming from a smaller repository, one thing that comes to mind is right now, Core Trust Seal is a high standard. It's a single bar. It's kind of a pull-up bar right now. And especially with getting more applicants, more perhaps smaller applicants, more novel repositories, there's a real opportunity or a value. And instead of a pull-up bar, it's a ladder with steps, right? And so that people are able to kind of, their first go isn't the most rigorous, largest certification. And I was just curious if there's been any thoughts about that.
I'm gonna let Core Trust Seal potentially respond to that feedback. If we could have a mic to the front of the room, please. Thank you. Thank you, Daniela. I apologize. Please.
Thanks. Yeah, the Core Trust Seal is supposed to be core. That's always the feedback. Every time you get a response that says, could you make this simpler? The answer is, yeah, which bits? And the goal of the Core Trust Seal is to try and make sure that the evidence that is requested is the evidence that you need to run a data service. And when we get into the in-depth discussion on this, no one's particularly keen on saying, ah, well, you don't need that bit. Yeah. But if you feel that it's not at the right level, there is a review and feedback process. And then I would really highlight that if you've got, as we've had in the past, resource issues and challenges, there are materials out there. Certification doesn't have to be your first step. Service improvement is what we're always here for. The cherry on top of certification doesn't have to be your main goal. There should be enough there to help you grow under each of those requirements towards that. And as Ingrid has outlined, there are more and more efforts through umbrella organizations, and I'd love to see more of that, where you agree what your local practice is for disciplinary or smaller archives or whatever, and then we help each other to reach that first step on the ladder. Does that make sense?
Hold on just a minute. I need to get you a mic, please, so that we can hear, so online can hear you. Thank you so much.
To clarify, I was suggesting in addition to Core Trust Seal, not incorporation in Core Trust Seal, right? Like recognizing there should be a high standard, but that there's value in creating steps.
Yeah,
but that's
and I'm saying that we would more than happily, if we're going to be core, we need to be accessible. If there's something that needs to be at a lower level to be corely applicable, yet still delivering a trustworthy service, that's part of the feedback process.
Thank you. We have other questions in the room. We had one in the back, and Danielle, if you could grab the mic, we have another one over here. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, Daniel from PTB. I'm from measurement science, so certification is our daily business. We call it accreditation. Maybe you've heard of that. So I'm very impressed from all presentations about how to ensure trust. Trust is like the daily business in standardization and laboratories. Our experience is it's very important to have independence between the organizations doing the assessment, the groups that define the requirements, and of course, those who are assessed. I'm new to Core Trust Seal. I heard the first time of it because I'm not from the, let's say, repository domain, but found this very interesting that similar developments like accreditation are taking place here as well. Just one message to everybody here. I think the important thing about this is, on the one hand, it can help you to achieve a certain level of quality of your services. And then it's important, it can help you to sustain this quality over many, many years. So as it was mentioned, it could improve your quality from certification to certification. This is maybe not the first reason why you do it, but to keep up a quality across a long time. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. It was very impressive, this session and the presentations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. I think we had a question over here. We have 2 minutes, so we welcome this question. If you have any others, you're also welcome to put things into the document that we have rolling. We'd be happy to follow up via email. I have none online, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Stefan Kramer from American University in Washington, D.C. If I remember the slide correctly from Devin's presentation, it showed that the repositories seemed to tended to score pretty high, all the near the 64 line there. And that made me think of a phenomenon in American colleges. Everybody is above average. Students who want to make sure they get a high grade point average. One way to do that, if it doesn't look good in a course, you drop out of the course and they take it again until you get an A. And that made me think of repository. If I'm a repository person running a repository or the manager of that, and we decide to go through a certification process. We pay our money, we start the process, and then we see it doesn't look good for us. Can I just drop out, or is there a registry among the certification providers that shows who started the process and who completed it? Because if not, then everybody's going to get an A in that process, right? Because who's going to go through it and get a really lousy grade and put that on their repository website?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to let Devin answer first, and then others, if you'd like to answer afterwards. Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So this came up the last session we had in Gothenburg, and because I was already kind of analyzing some of this and seeing this trend, And the way it was described to me, I think by John Crabtree at the time, was that there's a lot of work done on the front end. There's like a draft, I guess draft staging of the audit report. You can send in and get feedback, where you're going wrong or what, and have an opportunity to make some improvement so that you will actually succeed by the time you formally submit. So it's skewing higher because there's been a lot of back and forth on the front end so that you won't fail and it won't be a total, waste of time and effort from the people that are doing the audit at the repository and then from whoever is reviewing you at CTS. So that's part of how I would respond to that.
Thank you for that feedback. And we have some other response.
Everybody's right. Yeah, it's a self-selecting sample, which provides some really interesting stuff that's been hugely valuable to us. We're really lucky to have had Devon around. But you're completely right. So I point you to the first T in trust, which is the transparency thing. We need a greater level of visibility. I mean, the phrase we're using at the moment is assessment that leads to assistance rather than judgment, and making sure that we've got a wider view of what's going on out there, the whole community of practice. Core Trust Seal is trying to do the requirements in the certification service. It hasn't got the resources to do the rest of it, and it's not the right place to do it. You're absolutely right. We need that greater visibility, and that transparency, I think, is the big first step.
Thank you. Excellent question and excellent conversation. We're going to stop this right now so that we can move into our use cases. Next, I'd like to welcome Dawei and Mickey up to, actually, I think Mickey's first, and I will keep you on time. Thank you.
Thanks. I think I'm just making up for the gender imbalance by talking over and over and over again. So quick use case here. I already outed myself as a digital preservation nerd. That's what's important to us. As demonstrated in our use case, we clearly don't need trust principles as a vehicle towards certification. We already started doing that before the trust principles came out. But we are worried, and the we here is not just myself as well as TIB, but it's also Nestor, plus the digital preservation community for which I stand through Open Preservation Foundation, Digital Preservation Coalition, and others. We worried that the trust principles and efforts like trustworthy service providers, which the BOF meeting took place for, will distort or water down the digital preservation processes even further. There's a huge difference if you look at how digital preservation issues, long-term archival issues are covered. If you cross-compare Core Trust Seal, Nestor Seal, and ISO 16363, there's a great variation of detail in those. I think that's okay. That's what the frameworks were there for, to kind of map those. But if we use trust principles as a way to map something towards certification, we need to keep that in mind. And I think we should not lose focus on digital preservation requirements there. So then what is our use case? I see 3 use cases for us where we can strongly use trust as a communication tool. We can use it with our clients for the digital preservation as a service thing, where we can say, look, sustainability and technology, we got that fully covered, right? That's what you're buying from us. The first 3 letters, so TR and U, we have to do together. You know your data, you know who you want to do this for. You have to make or help us make decisions about what file format to migrate to or what to normalize to or whatever. It's something that is a shared requirement between those who sign responsible for the data on an intellectual level and those who sign responsible for the data on a technological level. Then we can also use trust as a communication tool with internal, external stakeholders. So when we talk to our own IT department, for example, or to our legal department or to our acquisition department, it's much easier to map requirements to a short acronym like trust than it is to actually dig out a standard and dig out the criteria ID. And right, you spent like 45 minutes just explaining the problem, and you could do it very easily through that. So it's very helpful for that. And lastly, I think it can be used as a communication tool to promote TDR certification for all certification frameworks, which I think the more the merrier, and we need to all move forward into agreeing on standards so that we can all measure our efforts better.
Thanks, Mickey. And I just want to kind of clarify the use case is really kind of use this as a hopefully like inspiration to hear your use cases are like and so Mickey, I think from the point of view is like from the certification standard and how to use that a communication tool. Actually, that was also like the trust principle is coming from, you know, from the culture seal standard. How do we can let people understand the more of the requirements? And so the use case I'm going to present is really from the repository point of view, like, you know, from like bottom up, like what the trust principles and all this the efforts we heard today that can help improve the operations of repositories and address the question of one all, like, you know, a couple hundred repository funded by NIH to be a student, you know. So that's kind of the intention. And so on that front, so NIH has funded I think 2 or 3 rounds of supplements to give to the repositories. I think like $150,000 for them to document what they're doing, and then if they feel they're ready, they can go like a culture seal, or I think the other certification actually is not available. Like they can go through that the certification processes. That's kind of one thing that as a kind of the medical funding agency kind of to support. And we also want to learn, you know, from what their processes, what they come up with, you know, how they can improve their operations. And then the bottom one is that is there is already certified biomedical repository from even before that that kind of funding opportunities, and but still like a small number. I think for the data preservation in biomedical field is still pretty new, and I think the intention is to have these activities is to create the vocabularies that in biomedical field, like how they say data preservation, how they can understand that is important, and how they kind of communicate between among the repositories. So that's the things I think that we have to do is, I think this is like more like a catching up to the bioscience, the social science and geoscience. They have been doing this for a long time. And so I think the use case will be is that sort of collect all this input and to see how we can do those, like a mapping or something, like to create a toolkit for even the repository that have not started creating yet, right? And let them to on the easy path and to start working on it. So that's sort of like the another example that how we can leverage the awareness and, you know, like the consensus from the community about the trustworthiness, and to really have something impactful. Yes. Yeah. So if anyone have like a use case idea, please, you know, maybe I can pass the microphone to you.
Since we've been doing lightning rounds, we have 1 minute to get 30 seconds to go. So what I'd like for you to do is, if you'd like to have a follow-up call, conversation, email, contact information, put it in the collaborative notes. I'd be happy to follow up with you. The committee would be happy to follow up with you. By the way, we did have at least one person sign up, so thank you. I don't know if you're online or in person, but I got an email alert. So yay, my goal was halfway reached. So thank you for helping make this meeting a success. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you for being a part of the discussion. Have a great day.